Incredibly dangerous. Oh, God, it's dangerous there. So we've got Assad, a guy that we ostensibly wanted out, right? We wanted him out. He was horrible. Then, well, we sort of reconsidered a little bit, and we haven't said much lately, like, well, maybe Assad's better than whatever might come next. But still, we officially don't want Assad there. The Russians are in Syria now, in a big way, tanks, troops, bombing. But they're not bombing ISIS. They're helping us to death by bombing, but they're bombing the wrong people. They're bombing the rebels who want to take down Assad. In other words, Russia's in there militarily propping up Assad. We've been complaining bitterly about it now for a long time, right? What do we want Russia to do? We want them to bomb who? ISIS, of course. So if this can be a bomb put in a plane by ISIS, then it might make the Russians really, really angry enough to begin actually bombing the people we hoped they would bomb. ISIS. So while we're normally extremely circumspect, I mean, we've seen a lot of plane crashes lately, right? And they're always very cautious. So what's up this time? Is there a connection between what the U.S. government and Britain say and then what CNN is hyping up? Yup, I think so. Anyway, for your consideration, you can write to me and let me know whether you think I'm right, wrong, or upside down. Then we've got the case of the USS Kitty Hawk. What is that? You know what the Kitty Hawk is, right? It's a great big super carrier. Kitty Hawk was in the Pacific, along with the ships that tend to her. And surprise, surprise, oh, Captain, look, off the port bow, it's a Chinese sub surfacing. That's right. A Chinese sub surprised everybody by surfacing near the Kitty Hawk. Now, my guess would be that somebody's head is going to roll because of this. I can't know that for sure, but I'm guessing. They were supposed to be protecting the carrier, and you were not supposed to ever get surprised by something like a Chinese submarine. So that's what's going on in the world. Now, forget all that stuff, except the star. That's very important. And let me tell you about what is coming up next. Deborah Moffat is just a regular person, an experiencer behind the acclaimed books A Deadly Haunting and Unwelcomed, which draw upon the frightening experiences she and her family endured at the hands of their unseen tormentor. Vastly intelligent and destructive, this demon wrought havoc in their lives and home, resulting in a daily battle to maintain their own sanity. After 25 years, Deborah decided to tell her story, detailing what went on in her family's home during the 6-year nightmare in which this entity plagued them. For these 6 years, can you imagine living like that? Can you imagine it? For these 6 years, the Moffat family was terrorized by a demon from the past. A demon that claimed that Lee Moffat was promised to him as a sacrifice. Hundreds of years ago, the entity had come to collect. There were no safe havens. There was nowhere to run. The Moffat family had only one option, as we would all have: survive. And so, in a moment, the Moffat story, A True Haunting.
At the terror in each sip and waning sun. Will you partake of that last offered cup, or disappear into the potter's ground when the man comes around?
Take a walk on the wild side of midnight. From the Kingdom of Nye, this is Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell. Please call the show at 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952-CALL-ART.
Well, all right then. I can take it. Mike in Massachusetts said, Art, no one's perfect. I just want to let you know before people start scolding you, it's Tabby's star, not Abby's star. Yeah, I knew that, Mike. It was just a test, and you're the only one that passed. No, Mike, I'm lying. I did blow it, and it is Tabby's star. It happens. I'm sorry. Tabby's star. It's Tabitha. So, Tabby. I don't know why I like the name Abby, but I do. And it gets stuck in my head. So, no, Tabby. Tabby's star. God, that's an important story. All right, now to Deborah Moffat, and you're just not going to believe what you're about to hear. Deborah, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you for having me on.
Do you prefer Deborah or Debbie or Miss
Debbie's fine.
Or Miss Moffat?
No, Debbie's fine.
All right. Debbie it is. Okay, Debbie, I guess in this, you have just, I blabbed away most of the first half hour, so if you would please, tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Actually, I have 3 children, still live in the same house where the last part of this story occurred, retired, and Mr. Entity has been gone 25 years now, and we've never heard another thing from him.
Well, if you have 3 children, then that's what you do.
Right, that's true.
So this all occurred that long ago, Debbie, is that right?
Yes, it did. It happened. It actually started before I was even in the scene. It happened. I married my husband in 1987.
Right.
And this actually started from what we can. The researchers that came to study it think it started back in 1980. Had to do with
I'm sorry, I missed the year 1980 something.
1984. 1980. And it had to do with a Guatemalan housekeeper who practiced Santeria.
Ah, yes. Okay, so who got her upset?
Well, back in 1984, my husband's mother, his grandmother, had a stroke, and they hired a Guatemalan housekeeper to take care of her.
Right.
And she lived right next door to my mother-in-law and my husband.
Right.
And the Guatemalan housekeeper, very nice lady, I don't think, from what I've been told, did any of this on purpose. She was afraid that when she lost her job, when the grandmother died, she'd have to go back to Guatemala.
I see.
So I think she was trying to keep the grandmother alive as long as she could. And what happened is she opened some type of a door and allowed something to come in.
Is this sort of all guesswork, or do you have any firm reason to believe that's what happened?
It's partly guesswork, partly from what my mother-in-law found at the house. After her mother died and Juanita left the house, they went to clean it, and they found strange markings all through the house. They found candle wax, broken rosary beads, and blood and feathers.
Oh.
So from what they told the researchers that came to the new house, they believe that that's probably what happened. That's because they can think of no other way, why this started.
Okay, but yeah, that's quite a bit. You said feathers and blood, and what else?
Broken rosary beads, feathers, candle wax, and strange symbols all through the house.
Okay, so there was practice going on in the house, no question about that.
Right.
Well, I do agree. I do certainly agree, Debbie, that when you dabble in such things, you do leave open the door for something you don't want as well as something you do want.
Yes. Like I said, I don't believe she did this, anything to happen on purpose. She was just trying to keep the grandmother alive to save her job.
Yeah, okay.
But it didn't matter. Something evil did come through.
Yeah, so I get that, but I read in the opening that Lee Moffat was promised to him as a sacrifice hundreds of years ago.
Right.
Now, that's different than somebody practicing Santeria and calling the wrong thing across.
Well, this is a story that now the entity used to communicate with us by writing on a mirror with soap.
Really?
And it would write from morning, noon, and night. And it told me the story of, because one of the times I asked it, why are you doing this? Why are you here? And it told me why it wanted Lee.
Okay.
That he was in not now I don't mean in physical form, but he was in a monastery way back in the 1600s, and some of the monks there practiced Satanism, and they promised him a blood sacrifice, and it never came to fruition. And the lady, she wasn't sacrificed, but he believed because she was promised to him, Lee, in a past life, now she still belonged to him, and now he found her and he came to collect her.
Okay, I want to be straight about this. Lee, or Lee to be, was promised in a past life to this demon.
Right.
So it wasn't Lee per se, it was, well, I guess it was Lee. How could they know to promise Lee would be there that far ahead of time?
I don't know. They promised her in that lifetime with the monks, they were going to sacrifice her, and something happened and she wasn't sacrificed. So he still believes she belonged. This is what the demon wrote to me. So he still believed that she belonged to him, and he came to collect her.
Wow. So Lee came to collect her. You mean, I thought Lee was your husband, no?
No, Lee is my mother-in-law.
Your mother-in-law, okay.
No,
I'm sorry.
My husband's mother.
I'll get it all straight.
It's a complicated story.
Okay. All right. So that Lee, the mother-in-law, was promised to this demon in a previous life. In other words, some kind of, almost like a curse, I guess?
I guess so, yeah.
In other words, don't take me, but you can take somebody in a lifetime or two or three, or whatever, somewhere down the line in my lineage.
Yeah, right. From what I understand, it was her. He gave the impression that it was her, that this was a previous life of hers.
Okay. That would make sense. But one would imagine there was a deal cut. In other words, don't take me, take somebody from my lineage somewhere down the line.
I don't know.
I don't know is a good answer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You know what? There are so many things about this to this day that I still don't know.
I'm glad you're saying I don't know. Listen, I really worry when somebody comes on the show with me, Deborah, and gives me an answer to everything I ask. When I hear somebody finally say, I don't know, I love it. It gives credibility to the story. Usually you push hard enough and somebody says, well, the demon told me one night when I had a deep sleep, or something like that. In other words, they try to provide an answer to every single question you ask. And as an interviewer, I've learned that's not a good sign. So stand by, Debbie, and we'll get back to you. This, of course, is Midnight in the Desert. Really, I'm telling you right now, I'm hearing voices in my head. Did any of you hear what I just heard? Did you? Anybody out there?
Sniff our packets. Then, with a smile on your face, please call the show at 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952-CALL-ART.
You should always be smiling. Actually, Mike in Virginia said, are you planning on doing a prediction show this year? Of course, Mike. It's a tradition, has been. The only thing I don't have, of course, is last year's predictions to make bonks out of, so it'll be a very positive show, looking ahead only. Or maybe 2 days of it, I don't know. And then you may have heard my remark prior to the break that I was hearing voices in my head. David, yes, I was hearing voices. And I called Keith, who operates, the board down there in Arizona. And I said, Keith, I'm hearing voices. Now, either they heard it on the air and will tell me, or you did it there. And he said, oh, not me. And then a moment passes. He said, oh, God, I left the mic on. And let me tell you, there's nothing more demonic than the Roland voice in your ear. Demonic indeed. And since I'm on the subject of the wormhole and messages you can send, if you are a time traveler, you get to pick. By the way, we've got between 75 and somewhere like 80 shows now in the hopper. You can go back and you can listen to old shows. You can hear last night's show in the afternoon when you want to hear it, and you have access to the wormhole, and you can send me messages about how I screw up, and so much more. All right, that said, yes, Roland's voice is demonic indeed. Debbie, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, so I would assume then, that long ago, your children were about what age when this began?
When this began, my one son had just been born in 1987.
Right.
And then the other two were born in 1990. They're twins.
Oh.
So until this came out in 2014, they knew nothing about it. We had never spoke about it in the house. So I had to tell them about it before I even wrote a book about it.
Okay. And here we go. We're now going to begin to get about it, what really happened. This is so well documented, all of this. I know that, for example, somebody I trust implicitly was there with you, Dr. Evelyn Paglini, who helped you out, I guess, substantially. You can confirm that, right?
Dr. Evelyn Paglini was awesome. She was a wonderful lady.
Okay.
I mean, when she came to the house, she came in with such courage and such confidence.
That was Evelyn.
Look at her, I thought, we're saved. This lady's going to save us.
If anybody could, she'd be the one. The Warrens, were the Warrens also involved somehow?
Yes, and Lorraine Warren came.
Really?
Yes.
But I guess Evelyn Paglini helped out a bit more?
She couldn't get rid of it.
Couldn't get rid of it?
She tried.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
And the entity hated Dr. Paglini.
I can imagine.
He absolutely hated Dr. Paglini. He every minute was writing nasty things about her, vulgar things about her on the mirror. But she told us, I can't get rid of this. She said, it's too powerful. It's ancient, it's old, and I can't get rid of it.
Let me tell you, for Dr. Paglini, that's one hell of a statement.
I know it, because I thought she'd be the one. But she said she was actually worried for my mother-in-law's life.
Oh, yes.
She said, I can suggest something to do. Whether you do it or not, it's up to you. She said, this deity, she called it an ancient deity, or she never really called it a demon. She called it more of a deity.
Okay.
She said, if you take one room upstairs and empty it and give it the room and pay homage to this won't hurt you, and it'll actually make your life better. She said, because I can't get rid of it, and I don't know if your mother-in-law can be saved. So,
oh, good Lord.
That's what she suggested.
Wow. Okay. Let us now go back to the very first thing, and you're still in the same house, right?
Well, see, it started at a different house.
Oh, it began. All right. So at this different house, located where? In what?
Where it very first started, it's in Rancho Cucamonga, on Archibald and Narrow Highway, excuse me.
I always thought there was something wrong with Rancho Cucamonga. I could never pin it down.
And there were like 3 houses right on the corner, right there. And my mother-in-law and father-in-law owned the one in the middle. Her mother owned the one next to it,
Okay.
and my husband owned the one on the other side.
All right. Well,
so
let's
the 3 houses were all connected.
Let's deal with the house you were in. Was it limited to that house, by the way?
No, and when all 3 houses were affected.
Oh my goodness! All right. Start with the first thing that ever happened.
No, I can start with the first thing that happened that I can confirm because I actually saw it.
Fair enough.
Things that happened earlier, I never saw, so it's only hearsay.
Fair enough. Thank
What
you.
I actually witnessed, the first thing was ports. We had a tenant that moved into. My husband rented his house out. And we lived with his mother and father.
Right.
He had a heart condition, and he just felt closer, felt safer living together. So we all lived together.
Right.
We rented out his house to a gentleman. He had a large sports collection, my husband. So he left one room in the house locked, and the gentleman had free run of the house, but he couldn't touch this room.
Got it.
We would go down periodically to check on the room. The very first thing that happened is we unlocked the door where his sports memorabilia were, and something had taken all the bobbleheads, baseball bobbleheads off the wall and put them into the shape of a triangle on the floor.
Oh my. All right.
And, of course...
And this is locked all the time. Is that right?
This was locked. We were the only ones with the key. But you automatically think, you don't think something's happening. We automatically thought the tenant did it.
Well,
So
that's just, but that's just bad. I mean, then you think you have somebody you can't trust.
Right, but at least you can see that person, and you can deal with them.
True.
We confronted him. He said, I've never been in that room. I never touch it.
I have a room like that in my house. There's nothing but very expensive, very complicated radios inside, and so nobody goes in there.
Right. That's the way Bill felt about his sports collection.
I fully understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so here are bobbleheads on the floor in a triangle.
Right. We locked it back up. Like I said, talked to the tenant. Well, he assured us he didn't touch it. Well, what could we say? We thought he did, but we said, well, don't do it again.
Right.
Within a week's time, my mother-in-law was very religious.
Yes.
Next to her bed, she had a stand with all types of religious statues on it. One morning, she wakes up, and on the statue of Jesus is a pair of men's briefs.
Bad.
Out of nowhere. Of course, she thought one of us was playing a joke. You know, what are you doing? None of us could figure out how it got there. At that time, none of us even understood what an apport was.
Well, look, even I don't know what it is. What is it?
It's something that moves, something like an object that moves without anyone physically moving it.
Right. Okay. Well, here's what I think. There's almost nobody, regardless of their religion, who would do something like that. I mean, it's just so highly disrespectful. I can't imagine. Of course, I don't know your family, but I can't imagine anybody would hang some underwear on a cross. No way.
No, she was very upset, and it progressed from there. Pretty soon we started getting all kinds of different clothing on her statues. Then we couldn't figure out where they were coming from. Then we started getting mail and receipts, and they were all coming from the tenant. They were coming from the house next door.
Receipts? You mean he was buying stuff?
Sure, there were like receipts where he bought some clothes, and he had a receipt for them.
Yeah.
And they'd end up on her chest by her religious statues.
I see. So it started all around religious artifacts.
Right. We went down to a house. It's very hard to explain to the man, listen, we have your things up at our house. You know, you can't do that. You'd think we took the things from his house.
Was that his underwear?
Yes.
Oh, good Lord.
It was his. I don't know for sure.
You know, at the beginning of that, I would, as a woman, and I'm not, I'd have reason to worry. If another man's underwear shows up on a cross over my bed or near it. Well, sure. I mean, at this point, they're probably, I don't know what you're thinking. You're thinking somebody broke in?
Right, that was another theory my mother-in-law thought. Maybe somebody came in when we weren't here.
Right.
Because, you know, you don't go to the supernatural, you go to reality.
Of course.
You try to justify things.
Of course.
But we couldn't. There was just nothing that we just didn't know what was going on. Went back down to the house like a couple weeks later, and he wasn't home. And we noticed over all the light fixtures where you click the lights on and off,
Yes.
someone had made strange symbols, and it looked like they were drawn in crayon.
Well,
So-
now, you did have children in the house, of course.
No. My children, my one son was only like a month old.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
I don't
And this
imagine
gentleman
him
was
slithering out of his...
No.
No, okay.
And this gentleman was all alone.
Gotcha.
So then within a few weeks, the gentleman said, I'm leaving.
Don't blame
Didn't
him.
give us a reason why. He just said, I'm going. And he told us that on Friday, and by Sunday he was gone.
Okay, so I would guess that he was experiencing things over there or tired of getting accused of doing things over there.
Right, that's what I think, too. He wouldn't talk about anything. He just left. So he was gone.
Okay.
We went when he left up to the house to look at it to see what needed to be cleaned to re-rent it.
Right.
My husband goes in his room. I stood in the living room looking around, seeing what needed to be cleaned. There was a long shelf on the top of the wall, ran the whole length of the living room with all kinds of knickknacks.
Right.
I looked at it, and then I looked back, and I looked again at it within like a blink of an eye. Every single thing on that shelf was turned backwards within a blink of an eye.
Oh, bad.
My husband came out. I said, you're not going to believe this. And he didn't. He said, no, you didn't see it right to begin with. They were all turned backwards. Maybe this man had problems. He did these weird things. So just let it go. So I knew, though, what I saw.
Right. That's right. I understand. You know what you see, and what you see is what you saw.
Right.
Simple as that.
We made plans to come back the next day to start cleaning. He kept the place pretty good, but it needed to be cleaned. We came in. We walked in the door. In the middle of the living room was a lamp from the bedroom sitting in the middle of the floor.
Ay, ay, ay.
And I just looked, and my husband said, "Oh, somebody must have came in the house," because he wouldn't want to believe. He was so afraid of the paranormal, he wouldn't want to believe something paranormal was happening. So he would try to make excuses what was happening.
Most normal people would.
Yeah. So we put that lamp back. We went into the kitchen. We went in the kitchen probably for 2 minutes. Came back into the living room, and the furniture from the dining room was stacked up in the living room.
Good Lord.
Within 2 minutes, and we didn't hear a thing.
Okay. At this point, I wonder what you were thinking, and I wonder what your husband was thinking.
Two completely opposite things. I looked at it as something, at the time, I wasn't familiar with anything paranormal. I had never been frightened in my life by it.
Right.
I looked at this as something absolutely fascinating. Look what was happening. You know, it was like my mind was going in circles trying to figure out what was going on. My husband's first instinct was, let's get out of here. Let's go. Let's hurry. Let's get out. But I wanted to try to understand what was going on.
You and I, Debbie, have different ideas of what's interesting. And by that I mean, for example, this star out there that could be aliens. That's interesting. A room full of furniture moving itself, I run like hell.
My husband also.
Feel free to
me, it was like I just couldn't understand it, and it was fascinating to me. I put the furniture back. He left. He stood outside the door. He didn't want to be in the house.
Don't blame him a bit.
But, you know, the feeling in the house, there was nothing nasty feeling in the house. Do you know what I mean? The house didn't feel like an evil presence or something threatening. It was like this, and it became almost like a game. When I'd go up there to clean, I would go into a room and I'd say, if there's something here, move something.
Yeah.
When I was cleaning, and I'd come back and something would be moved. So it almost became like this game where, you know, it gets you, like it grabs you, look what I can do.
Debbie, a game is Candy Crush. What you're describing is no game, but I guess you were playing.
Really, because to me, it wasn't frightening. It was amazing at that time.
Okay. I've got to give you props for a steel spine that I don't have. I'd have been so out of there like your husband. Boy. So this went on how long?
Now, this went on probably for another week, and then everything just stopped.
Oh.
It just stopped. It was like nothing happened. We went back to the house. Nothing was moving. Everything just went right back to normal.
Okay.
So the next month we decided, everything's back to normal now. Maybe this gentleman, left something, he dabbled or did something, left something wrong, and everything's gone now, so we're okay.
Uh-huh.
So we decided to re-rent it out.
Right.
Now, during this time, the neighbor on the other side that we rented out, the grandmother's house, had talked to my husband and said, did someone die in this house? Which no one had. And my husband told him no. But he evidently had been playing with a Ouija board. And he said he contacted something on a Ouija board.
Oh, brother.
And he wanted to know if anyone died in the house. My husband said no, didn't want anything more to do with it because he didn't want to even talk about it.
So this neighbor wanted to know if anybody had died because he had been playing with a Ouija board.
And had contacted someone.
Okay. And I presume stuff began to happen to him.
We don't know. He never said a word. But one strange thing that happened, his son, he was like 20, 21 years old,
yes,
moved in with him. We saw his son. This was a strange thing. We saw his son, my mother-in-law, walk by the house. She was walking her dog, and his son was in the backyard, and he was digging holes and planting trees, but he wasn't planting trees like planting trees. He was planting them upside down.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was going to talk to him. She said when she looked at him, he just stared at her and just stared, and she got frightened, and she left him alone. She said she didn't care if he was planting trees upside down. She just left.
I get that.
So things were happening on both sides, and then everything stopped. It was like it just stopped. So we thought, well, okay, everything's okay now.
So did somebody go out there and plant the trees correctly, or did they stand forever looking silly?
No, they died, and they were all just thrown away.
That figures.
Eventually, because within a month or so after that, the tenant died.
Okay.
Monty, his name was. He died.
Okay.
And his son moved out, so that house was empty.
Did he die a natural death, might I ask?
He died congestive heart failure, which is funny because it seems like everybody connected with this died of congestive heart failure.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine. My husband died of congestive heart failure. His mother died of congestive heart failure. His father died of congestive heart failure. His uncle that lived in the house next door died of congestive heart failure.
Wow.
So it seems to be something that runs through that.
Apparently.
Yeah. So we rented out the house again where the tenant was with the bobbleheads. We rented that out again because everything was quiet.
Sure.
And like I said, there was nothing threatening that happened. So I didn't feel frightened in any way. My mother-in-law and my husband, on the other hand, they were still frightened of this.
Did you disclose to this new...
Yes.
You did?
My husband said, this house may be haunted. And they laughed. It was like, back then it was like 1987. It wasn't like today when people are more open-minded and they understand more about what's really happening out there. Back then it was more of a joke. This is a haunted house.
Yeah.
So they moved in. It was a younger woman and an older gentleman. They weren't married, but they lived together. The lady was very kind. We lived next door. I would talk periodically with her when I went out in the yard. She was a nice lady. Then I noticed that I didn't see her very much.
Oh.
And then I see her in the front yard, and she looks like someone had beaten her up. And I confronted her. I said, "Are you okay? What happened?" And she told me that since they moved in the house...
Hold it right there. Hold it. That's a great hold. Hold it right there. We've got a break. It's the long one I told you about. What do you think she said? I'm Art Bell.
You get a shiver in the dark. It's raining in the park. But meantime, sound of the river, you stop and you hold. You know that I'll never leave. When I wanted you to share my life, I had no doubt in my mind. And it's been you, woman, right down the line.
Midnight in the Desert doesn't screen calls. We trust you. But remember, the NSA, well, to call the show, please dial 1-952-225-5278. That's 1-952-CALL-ART.
By and away my favorite Ross thing. Hi, everybody. I'm Art Bell. This is Midnight in the Desert. I am interviewing Deborah Moffat, and I want to give you a warning that what's coming up is going to be really frightening stuff. If you have a weak heart, take care. Perhaps it's not for the kids. So the first part has been sort of, light, kind of scary for me in a way, but not the heavy-duty stuff that's coming. Here once again is Deborah Moffat. Deborah, welcome back. So the neighbor was there looking as though she'd been pummeled.
Right.
And you asked her.
And she said, she told me ever since they moved into the house that her boyfriend had become hostile. She said she didn't know what had happened to him. I told her, she had to get away from him. She said, don't worry, I can take care of myself. And that was the last time I ever saw her. Within a week, everything was quiet, but I didn't see Michelle. Another week went by, no Michelle. I saw him out in the front yard. I said, how's Michelle? I haven't seen her in a while. He said Michelle left. And I thought Michelle left. That was the last I heard about it. Within the month, he moved out. He just said he had to leave, no problem. He just was leaving. We went up there to clean the house, and it was spotless. I mean, it was bleached. It was cleaned. There wasn't a bit of dust anywhere. The only thing missing was a rug. It was like a throw rug, big throw rug.
Suspicious. Did anybody check out under the upside-down trees? Dead trees.
No. So we decided we just locked it up. We didn't know. By this time, my husband, my father-in-law, myself, and my mother-in-law had decided we were going to sell the properties and move to a new house, a bigger house, and live together. So we were thinking, we won't rent anything out anymore. When Monty died, we didn't rent the other house out. When this tenant left, we weren't going to rent this one out again. Okay. After he left, about a week or so, maybe 2 weeks later, someone was knocking at that door. I was in the front yard. I yelled over, he doesn't live there anymore. He asked me, well, do you know where he is? I said, no. He said, did you hear what happened to Michelle? And I said, no, I haven't heard anything about Michelle. He said they found Michelle beaten to death, wrapped in a rug in a landfill.
Oh, my God.
Now, I was in shock because I didn't know if this was, first of all, I didn't know if it was true. I hadn't heard anything about it on the news or in the newspapers. It was just what this gentleman was telling me. And also I remembered her saying how the gentleman, her boyfriend changed when he moved into the house. So I remember going home and telling everybody in the house what had happened. And I said, do you think we should call the police and explain, what happened? And no, they said, we don't even know if this really happened. How do we know this man was even telling us the truth? So I don't know if that had actually happened to Michelle or it didn't. It's just what the gentleman told me. But to me, that was rather scary because at that point, it changed from something that was non-threatening to something that maybe was very evil.
Maybe. But, it would have been possible, Debbie, to go to either the police or a local newspaper and find out if that... I mean, after all, if somebody's found in a landfill in a rug, dead, that's going to be a story.
That's what I thought the same thing. But like I told him, my husband was the type, he read every newspaper, watched all the news. He said he hadn't heard a thing about it. So I don't know if that was true or if that wasn't true. And
pretty weird comment to make either way.
Right. It just put a lot of, it made me frightened at that point of what this thing could do if it was real.
Right, okay. You could even at this stage, even today, you could go back and find out if such thing had happened, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know what? That would be interesting to do, to find out, because
sure would.
Michelle was a nice lady.
It's not a light comment you just drop on somebody. I mean, he must have had some knowledge.
I mean, where would it come out of the blue? I mean, there had to be some fact. Stories always have based on some fact.
Or if made up. Why would somebody make up a comment like that? Good God.
Yes.
Found dead, wrapped in a rug. Okay. All right. Continue.
So we left both houses empty. We found a new place to live. It was like 10 miles up the hill from where we lived.
All right.
And so we were moving very slowly. They put the property on the market, and we were moving our possessions very slowly up into the new house. The very last day we were there at the house, my mother-in-law and I were alone. And for us, this is when it really became hostile towards us. Everyone was gone. My mother-in-law and I were in the back bedroom. We were getting the last of her things, and there was one box. And all of a sudden from the kitchen, we hear almost like an explosion. We run to the kitchen, and the entity or whatever, what happened, all the cupboards had been just ripped off the walls.
The walls?
Off the walls. There were pieces of them were lying all over the cupboard, all over the floor in the kitchen.
Oh, Terry.
Yeah, then we hear glass breaking. We go back into the bedroom to see what happened, and it blew out all the windows in the back bedroom.
Oh, my God.
And I remember grabbing my mother-in-law by the arm, and we just ran out of the house and got in the car.
And did what? I mean, in the car, sure, for a while, shaking,
We
probably.
Just sat there. My mother-in-law was shaking. She was so frightened.
That I get.
We went back home when we were up at the new house, and thank God for a small time, everything was quiet. Nothing happened. It was like we found our safe haven. We were okay. At least that's what we thought. But it didn't turn out that way. We were here for like 3 weeks, and then a thing that anybody else would experience, they would just ignore it, happened. A picture was turned backwards. And it was like a bell went off in my head. It was like,
here we go again.
It's with us. So it came with us from. We thought we got rid of it by moving, but it didn't. It came with us.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go again. So it wasn't the house. It was you, or it was your mother-in-law.
It was my mother-in-law. Now, by this time, my husband and I. And we're trying to talk. My mother-in-law, she was the one that was against telling anybody what was going on or trying to find somebody to help us. Because she said people will think we're crazy. Or she had it in her head, if things like this happen to us, we must be evil and we're getting punished for something. We couldn't make her understand, this is something's happening, we need help. So from this point on, we became very isolated. We started to look for help, but we became isolated. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody about what was going on.
What do you mean? What do you mean you weren't allowed?
My mother-in-law would go into hysterics. She wouldn't want anybody to know what was happening to us.
I see. Okay.
So we just kind of kept it to ourselves. And then then the entity started to isolate us even more. He would go where we went, and he would make it so uncomfortable where we went, we would stop going places. Like we couldn't invite someone to the house, so we would go to visit them at their house.
Yes.
But the entity would do something, like we went to this gentleman's house. It was a friend of my husband and my mother-in-law's. And when we came home, on our kitchen table was the gentleman's wallet. Now, we were just at his house. How can we explain to this gentleman why we have his wallet?
Very carefully.
So it did things like that to make us so uncomfortable that we kind of isolated ourselves from everyone. And by this time, we finally got my mother-in-law to try to allow us to go and try to find help to tell people what was going on.
What kind of help?
First of all, we went to a psychologist right here in Rancho Cucamonga, because I remember my mother-in-law was contacting the church at the time to try to get a priest to come to the house, and we decided to go to a psychologist to see if any one of us was causing this. So we went to a psychologist.
Gee, they wouldn't be the ones to really be able to pin this sort of thing down, would they?
No, not really, but my mother-in-law said we need to go find out if one of us is causing this.
Okay.
So we went to the psychologist, explained the whole situation. He was dubious at first. The more we explained to him, the more he started to believe. Finally, he said, I can't help you. He said, you need to go to a parapsychologist, or you need to get in touch with a church or some kind of institution that studies this kind of things. I can't do anything to help you. So that was the first avenue.
Probably gave you a referral slip and $200 bill.
It was a big bill. So my mother-in-law contacted the local church. She had been very religious. She had stopped going to church actually when her mother died. Her mother and her used to go to church together. So when her mother died, she stopped going to church. But she was still a very religious woman.
Right.
She contacted the church. The priest agreed to come to the house. He came to the house. It was an older gentleman. He walked in the house. He walked into the foyer, and he wouldn't move from there. He was supposed to go through the whole house and bless the house. He said, no, I don't have to. I can do it here. He took out his holy water and he made the sign of the cross in the hallway. And he said, okay, it's blessed. And my mother-in-law said, aren't you supposed to go to every room and do this? He said, no, this is good enough. I have to leave. So then my mother-in-law decided she would try to explain to him what was going on. And he didn't want to hear it. He looked at me and said, ladies, when they get this age, they get a little crazy. I got to get out of here. And he just ran out of the house and jumped into his car.
So the way you're telling the story, it sounds like he felt whatever it was, either was lazy or felt whatever it was and said, I'm out of here.
That's what I think it was, because he looked frightened. It wasn't like, he was too old to do it. It was just like he just wanted to leave. He wasn't comfortable.
Okay. This is sounding more serious all the time. Okay, so he tossed the holy water, said the words, split. Now, at this point, I'm sure you're hoping that did the trick anyway.
I was very doubtful that just that was going to affect this. But my mother-in-law was crushed because she thought the church would help her. So this really was a blow to her. From about this time, the entity started to focus all its negativity towards my mother-in-law.
Right.
Now, it made my mother-in-law's life hell. It destroyed her clothing. It would take one shoe, so she'd have a pair of shoes, but they'd be from different pairs of shoes. It would take her money, her wallet. It would destroy her credit cards, her license. She couldn't own anything. She couldn't have anything on her. Her purse, it would hide. Her glasses, she had a very bad eyesight. It would take her glasses, so she was constantly having to buy new glasses.
All right, I don't mean to be insensitive, but I've got to ask this. You remember what the priest said, right? Sometimes older ladies, particularly if they're scared or just because they're older, I mean, we all begin to change, right? So are you confident that the mother-in-law was of sane mind and...
Yes.
Other than being scared, I get that, and who wouldn't be?
My mother-in-law was an old-world Italian lady, as smart as they come.
Okay.
And she was just frightened, but she was sane.
Okay.
And, I mean, I would see she'd go to her purse to try to get something, and she'd pull out money, it'd be all cut to pieces. Or she'd pull out her credit card, and it'd be sliced in pieces. So it just tormented her. In the new house, it was quite large. She had a bedroom upstairs with my father-in-law, and it had its own bathroom and a sitting room upstairs. We had the master bedroom downstairs, which was a little bit further away from them.
Okay.
And another thing it liked to do was knives. It would bring knives. Now, these knives weren't our knives. I don't know where the knives came from. He just imported them. He would stick them through the bottom of chairs. Especially it would be the chair that she would sit in, so that if she sat, she'd sit on a knife.
See, there's a message in that. A fairly clear message. That would, it would be. I get messages. If that started to happen to me, I don't know. I'd question my wife and my daughter. But if I realized that this was happening, from something like this, I don't know what well, actually, I don't know what you can do. You apparently can't move because it follows you.
Right.
You can't stop it because it's not human.
Right. We can't even see it to defend yourself. What do you do?
Yeah.
It progressively got worse. I mean, she'd go to bed at night and it would put knives in the pillow. So it got to the point where I'd have to be with her, and we'd go wherever. If she was going to sit down, we used to have to look before she'd sit so she could sit down safely.
I'm
The
all
next
for that.
thing that happened to me was the most amazing thing. All these other things were just torment. But the next thing to me was amazing. It started to write on the mirror with soap.
Okay.
And it was
What did it?
upstairs in her bedroom.
What?
In the bathroom of
What?
her bedroom.
What is the first thing you saw?
The first thing it said was, I think it was talk to me.
Really?
Yes. And then I remember my father-in-law, when it first happened, she was upstairs alone. So, when she called me up, she said, you have to see this. I left the room, I came back in, and this was on the mirror. Everyone else was downstairs, so it just was her upstairs. So when we all came upstairs to look at it, to see what was going on, immediately the first thing you think of is one of us wrote it.
Sure.
Because I never even heard of ghosts or demons writing on things and actually communicating with you. I never heard of that.
Well, it was in her room, so you would think she wrote it, right?
Right. So what we did first, we examined it, and I found out that it was soap. And so we cleaned it. We cleaned the mirror.
Right.
And we walked outside the bathroom. We were the only people in the house. There's only one door to the bathroom. The four of us stood outside the door. And I remember we talked. We said, if we go back in and there's writing, then we know none of us are doing this. We opened the door. We went back in.
Right.
And there was writing on the mirror.
Oh, my God.
So we knew then no one else could be in the little bathroom. No one else could get in the bathroom. We were in front of the door. And the four of us were right together.
Perfect.
So we knew
all right, so,
something was happening.
all right, so this time, what did it say?
It started saying it didn't want us to go in the attic.
Don't go in the attic.
Right. It didn't want us to go into the attic. It started to pretend. When it wrote, it would write all the time. It pretended to be my mother-in-law's dead sister. My mother-in-law had a nickname when she was a child that only her one sister called her.
Yes.
It was Nini.
Right.
And the entity wrote on the mirror, Nini, don't go near the attic.
Sound advice, in my opinion.
So it didn't want us in the attic. It would say things, there's a bad wire, there's going to be a fire, stay away from it. It wasn't saying to us, if it was her sister, have someone check out your attic, there's a bad wire in it, I don't want you guys to get hurt. It was saying us stay out of the attic. So it didn't want us in the attic.
Well, I'm impressed that there were four of you who, after immediately cleaning this mirror, went back in and then saw it. Okay, so that
Right.
eliminates any other possibility.
It did.
Yeah.
At that point, we knew it wasn't one of us, and no one else could get in there.
All right, so usually, when there's a button and it says, don't press this button, everybody does. They press the button. So it didn't want you to go in the attic. And, oh, my
Right.
God, there's a mouse crawling across my table. I'm serious. Excuse me for a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to see if I can... My God, what is a mouse doing here? I wonder if it's your influence. I'm going to see if I can get a picture of this. Hold on. What in the world is a mouse doing in my...
It's funny because we were infested by rats for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Hold tight. Oh, now he's gone. Darn it. All right, where'd you go? I was just set to take a pee. He was just sitting right there. I'm sorry, Debbie. I'm really sorry. You're in the middle of this story, and I'm talking about a mouse. Where did he go? Okay, let's continue with the story, Debbie. I'll keep an eye out for the little guy.
Okay.
I hope it has nothing to do with your story.
I hope so.
Please continue.
So my father-in-law, we stood there. My father-in-law one time asked it what its name was.
Yes.
And it wrote Prince. It wanted to be called Prince.
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 Okay. At this point, apparently, he was, I don't know, getting used to this to the point he could do something like that, ask a question.
At this point, yeah, other than that, the time when it answered that, for the first, year, it didn't communicate with us more so it spoke at us. It wouldn't respond to what we were asking it. It would tell us things it wanted us to do, things we weren't supposed to do. It almost became our we were almost like held captive.
Was it like bad things it was telling you? I mean, give me an idea.
It was bad things, but it would, it would say, don't go in the attic, don't do this, don't bring anybody to the house. If my mother-in-law and father-in-law had to go somewhere, if they didn't ask the entity, say they were going to go, it would destroy the car so they couldn't go. It had such power, it stopped us from doing some of the things we wanted to do. It would break windshields, break headlights. It was the most. You can't believe the feeling of almost being held captive in your house.
This is very serious damage, for one thing.
It destroyed the house. The entity had a symbol. It was a triangle, and it had a tail coming out the bottom. And it carved this symbol in the walls. It burned them in the walls. It cut pieces, like 4 or 5 foot pieces of rug out in the symbol. It literally destroyed our house. Every day was putting our house back together.
That's incredible. I mean, how do you go on living with something like that? Now, I guess at this point you knew it was with you, not just the house, so it wouldn't make any difference to move.
It was with us. I mean, no matter we went, like I said, we'd go out to dinner, we'd come home, on the kitchen table would be the name tag from the lady that waited on us. One time we went out to dinner, and my mother-in-law looked down at her plate, and her meat, it had a big, like someone had taken a big bite out of her meat.
Yeah.
So where we went, it went.
Well, that sure takes the fun out of a night out.
Yeah.
Okay, so there had no way to get rid of this thing. I mean, I would have tried another priest. I don't know what.
We tried everything. We called Lloyd Arback. He was in charge. He had a paranormal organization.
I know him. Yes.
Yeah, he sent Chris Chacon out, and I remember Chris Chacon came out, and he had, at that time, I've never seen one before, one of those meters, EMF meters or whatever it is.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And he went through the house and he checked it with that and everything. And when he was done, he couldn't do anything, he said. I said, well, what is it? What's going on? And he said to me, very, very nice gentleman, he said, there's some things in this world you're never going to understand. And that was all they could do for us.
Did he
Everyone that came, and we called, there was no one we didn't try. We tried musicians. We tried people that practiced Wiccan. We tried, we went to Thelma Moss. She sent out Carrie Gaynor because she wasn't doing it at the time. Uh-huh. He came to try to help us. No one could get rid of it. They would say, we'll pray for you. We had religious people come out, we'll pray for you. But no one could help us.
Well, okay. I'm lost. I mean, at this point, what does anybody do? You mentioned he had a meter. Did anything register on the meter?
He didn't tell me anything. All he would tell me was, there's some things in this world you're never going to understand.
All right. Well, I know Lloyd, so I'll talk to him about it.
Yeah.
But obviously,
Lloyd Arbuck, very nice man.
Nice.
He was, very nice man. I'm trying to think other. We had, like I said, people from all over. We even wrote to people in different countries. In Brazil, there was a gentleman that worked with these things. We contacted him. He told us to contact the Warrens. But before we contacted the Warrens, we had other people come out. We had this is the time I saw it show itself, or at least use something to show itself. 2 shamans came out to the house. Very nice people. They came out. By this time, the entity had destroyed my mother-in-law's room upstairs to the extent, and it was felt so dangerous now. We all moved in together into the master suite downstairs.
Huddling together.
Yeah, so now downstairs we have, thank goodness it's a really large room, it has a sitting room, so we had beds in there, we had bed in the other part, so we all stayed together. At night, we didn't go apart. My mother-in-law very rarely even walked through the house by herself.
Don't blame you a bit.
No,
I think any group of people would be so terrorized. Yes, you can do nothing. There is nothing, literally, you can do. So you try to survive.
Right. That's what you do. You try to survive the best you can. It got to the point where she'd be sitting in a chair. She'd turn next door, and next door would be a knife sticking right next to her in the wall.
Oh, my God.
And these weren't our knives. We ended up with a box of knives a big box of knives that weren't our knives that we just threw away.
Really?
He just supported them here.
So you saved them?
We had them in a box, and we threw them away after about a year when the box got filled. We just threw them away.
You had a box full of knives?
Yeah, and they weren't our knives. And they were all kinds of knives, old knives, new knives.
So, at this point, you had no idea. Well, you were in discussions with this thing, right? I mean, obviously.
Up to a point, we weren't, because in a way, like I said at the beginning, the first year or so, he talked at us. He wouldn't really communicate with us. Later on, he started communicating with me. But at this point, he wasn't. Like, the last thing was, like, before the spear came. I'll talk to you about the spear. But before they came, the Indians came. The shamans came.
Indians,
yeah,
okay.
Shamans. Very nice people. They really tried to help us. There were 2 shamans came, a female and a male. And I went with them upstairs. Now, no one was upstairs. The entity took over the upstairs. It became his upstairs. Okay. You could feel it if you started going up the steps. You'd get halfway up the steps, and it was like something would just tell you no, and you didn't want to come back down the steps. You just left it alone. So we didn't use the upstairs for like 6 years.
Good Lord.
He went. The 2 shamans went upstairs. They asked me to come with them. I went with them. They did a ritual. They had. I remember feathers, and they were putting sage, I think, all through the rooms and chanting. They opened up the door, which is right at the top of the steps that goes into the attic. They opened up the door, and they would blow the sage in. And as they would blow the sage in, a second later, something would blow it back out.
And so their reaction?
Yeah, you could see the smoke go in, then you could see something blow it out again.
And their reaction to that?
They said, we have to go into that room.
Okay.
So they went into the attic. I stood right at the doorway so I could be right there seeing what was going on. Now, the attic had a pink insulation around the walls. And he told me he was going to confront this and make it show itself. I stood right there and watched this happen. And it's something I'll remember to my dying day. As I watched, the pink installation came off the sides of the wall and formed into a gigantic head. It was like a 5-foot head hanging from a rafter. And it was just a head, that was all, and I only saw the side view of it. I didn't see the front. And it had a huge chin and a large nose, and on the side of its head, instead of an ear, it had a circular horn that started there and made a circle and went up and over the top of its head into a big horn.
How are you taking this, Debbie? Even the unaverage person could not take this kind of stuff happening.
You know, this is the truth. I don't know why, but from the very beginning, I was not frightened of this. It was almost like one of us in the house had to be the strong one. My husband couldn't. He had a bad heart. My father-in-law wasn't a good person. My mother-in-law was weak, and I had a child. Someone had to defend the family, and it was left to me. So that was it.
All right, Deborah Moffat, hold on. The head part, that would have been over the top. Way, way, way over the top for me. I'm Art Bell. This is Midnight in the Desert. Tell you all about the mouse in a moment. Damn it. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
Set in the dark, stays in the dark. Call Midnight in the Desert at 1-952. Call Art. That's 1-952-225-5278.
All right, my guest is Deborah Moffat. She's in a nightmare nobody can even contemplate. We're only part way through the story. It's off the charts. Totally off the charts, as you can hear. I want to take a second because I've never had anything like this happen before. Now, I'm telling you, you heard me when it happened. I just took a picture, and I sent it to Keith. Now, it's not of the mouse, because the mouse is vanished, gone. Here's the way it came down. And it's just too weird. I mean, on my right, literally, on my right is a Denon CD player, right? And above that, I've got a special Denon machine that plays Keith's voice. Get the evil Keith on my mind. Will play Ross's voice.
Feel free to.
Like that, when I hit a button. That's where the mouse was standing. Now, that's directly in front of me, right next to me. And this mouse is sitting there, eyes open, looking at me, curious or something. I mean, why would a mouse get that close to a human and then just sit there and stare? I turned to my left to get my camera, and, I started to open the camera app, and I turned back around and it was gone. That was freaky. Let me tell you, that was freaky. That mouse I'm going to name Abby. I need to do something with the name Abby. Oh, God, I wonder where it is. What was weird about it is, A, it was so close to me. B, it could have set off Ross's voice. It was just standing there. And C, it was staring at me. I'm telling you. I looked it right in the eyes. It looked at me. I know. Too much, right? But it happened, and I had to get that off my chest. So anyway, I sent a picture to Keith of the equipment I'm talking about, and he's going to post it up there, I think. So you can take a look. You'll see how close this is to me. It's right here. I could have, if I'd been fast and had the guts, I could have grabbed him with my hand. That's how close he was. But the little sucker was staring at me. All right. Gathering back together, it's just weird. It's weird that it happens when I'm getting a story like this from Debbie. Hey, Debbie.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost impossible. There's, a mouse. They're pretty,
timid.
Timid and scattered. This guy was, I could have grabbed him with my hand. That's how close he was, and just staring at me. Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your weirdness. So, this thing is ruining your life. It's ruining your house, literally destroying your house. It's putting knives hither and yon in places where you might sit. God, that awful thought. And there's no help to be had, no matter who you see.
We tried everything. It got to the point where my mother-in-law was becoming distraught, which you couldn't blame her. She had no life. She couldn't even have money to do anything.
Right.
I believe that this entity, whatever it was, and I still to this day don't really know what it was, I don't think it had the power to actually kill her. I think it wanted her to commit suicide. And that was trying to drive her to suicide. Because with the power it had, I can't believe it couldn't just snap her neck if it wanted to.
That's a very good point. A very good point. It seems like it was trying to either scare her to death, or, as you point out, have her take her own life.
Right. Now, when they moved down to downstairs with us in the master bedroom, and the entity no longer wrote upstairs because no one was up there to see it.
Right.
It started writing in the guest bathroom downstairs. So it moved from upstairs to downstairs, not living, but writing.
Right.
So that's where it did all its writing. And it wouldn't write a little bit. It would write morning, noon, and night, constantly writing.
Examples, please, of what it said.
It would, like I said, at first it would tell us what to do. How it changed was like this. This was after like 2 years of going through this constant terror, especially with my mother-in-law. And it got to the point it was just too much. Then something happened. The entity locked her in the pantry. She got up to get some paper towels. It locked her in the pantry, and it did grab her by the throat and throttled her. Now, like I said, with its strength and its power, it could have killed her if it wanted to, but it didn't. But it did leave marks on her throat. At that time, it just got to the point where I felt so helpless. Because what can you do? I was trying to protect her the best I could, but how can you fight at something you can't see? So I went into the mirror at this time. I was very angry with the entity. And I confronted it, and I told it, I said, listen, I'm going to treat you with respect. You'll treat me with respect. You're not to touch my child, my husband, or my mother-in-law, Lee. And I left the bathroom to see what it was going to say. A minute later, I walked back in, and it wrote on the mirror, "I will not touch the child. I will not touch your husband, but Lee belongs to me." That's when it told me, when I asked it why, that's when it wrote the story of what happened in the past and why she belonged to him.
Well, wait a minute. It wrote the whole story?
Yes, it took a couple of hours. I would go in, he'd write on the mirror, I'd erase it, I'd go back out, come back in. He told the whole story.
Huh, Debbie, I don't get how you held up through this.
You know what? It's because I didn't have a choice.
Well,
what can I do?
Yeah, I do get that. I guess I get that. But when I say held up, I meant psychologically held up. How did you, not go bonkers?
Because I was so worried about everybody else and making sure they were safe and trying to appease the entity at the same time. Because I found out from that time on, that's when I started calling the entity Mr. Entity. I wouldn't call it Prince because I wouldn't give it that power over me to call it Prince because that's what it wanted. So I couldn't call it Entity. So I just called it, I told it I'd treat it with respect. And it sounds silly, but I started calling it Mr. Entity. From that time on, I referred to him as Mr. Entity, and he would call me Debbie. And from that time on, instead of talking at us, he started to actually communicate with me. He would write to me on the mirror.
Did you get any photographs of all this?
This is funny. When it first started, we'd had one researcher come and he would say, "Now take pictures of everything that happens and document everything so that you can show the next researcher or you can show me what's happening."
Yes.
So we would. It'd write on the mirror, we write it in a book, and we try to take pictures. Now, some of the pictures aren't great because you have to remember back at that time, it wasn't the digital camera where you could see if you took a good picture.
Right.
And taking pictures of a mirror, you got a lot of glare.
Right. Right, I get that, but you did. Okay. You did take pictures.
During this whole, 6-year period, we must have taken 1,000 pictures.
Okay.
Right? But this is what would happen. The next researcher that would come would say to us, "Now, you got to get rid of all these pictures. You got to get rid of all this documentation because you're keeping it here. You're acknowledging it and you're making it stay. So throw all this away." So it was a constant taking pictures, throwing them away, taking pictures, throwing them away. So luckily, my husband, who was a hoarder, he would not throw them all away. He had a box, which I didn't know about until he died. He would take some of the pictures and he'd throw them all the time in the box. So I have over 200 pictures, 250 pictures of the demon writing and the things that happened with the negatives. So I have a box full of those, but they're not all the pictures because we threw most of them away.
Yeah, but it would be enough.
Yeah.
It would be enough.
In the book, The Unwelcome. That's why I actually wrote the second book. Because the second book, actually, I just wanted to show people the pictures. There's over 100 pictures in that book of what went on. And that's what's so fascinating. Even me, who went through it. See, for 25 years we hid it because once it left, we decided we're not going to talk about it because people said, "Well, don't talk about it because you'll bring it back." So we didn't want it to come back. So we never, for 25 years, we made a vow. We never spoke to a person about it. No one ever knew anything about it. Even my kids didn't know about it.
You said, you indicated that something strange happened. Well, go ahead. Your husband died?
My husband died, and I was cleaning out the closet, and I found the box in the back of the closet.
Right.
And I opened it up, and it was full of the pictures from the demon.
Okay, and those are in your book?
Yeah. Just 100 of them. I have hundreds more.
You have 100 pictures in the book. That's pretty darn good, I'd say.
Yeah, I wanted people to see it. I wanted people to realize that, this happened. Look what it did. Look how it communicated.
Okay, your books are A Deadly Haunting and Unwelcome.
Now the Deadly Haunting is the fiction version. It's based on the true story, but it's more fictionalized. But 95% of it's accurate.
Okay.
I wrote Unwelcome because I wanted everything to be the truth. I wanted people to know just what happened, and I wanted to show the pictures.
Oh, all right. Now, you indicate that something happened involving animals. What was that?
Oh, this is very sad for me to talk about because the entity killed our animals. When we left the first houses down on the other street, we left our dog down there the last night. We were going to pick him up in the morning because we had no place to put him.
Right.
And we had wrought iron gates. And the entity took the dog, and he actually pulled the dog, a pit bull, big, heavy pit bull, it actually pulled it through one of the 3-4-inch wrought iron slots.
Oh, my God.
So half the dog was on one side and half was on the other.
Oh, my God.
And I could cry when I even think about it, why we left that dog there. I remember saying, please, let's take him. No, he'll be okay one night. We'll pick him up tomorrow. And he wasn't. It's so sad. It was just...
All right, you did contact Ed and Lorraine Warren, right?
Right. I contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren.
What did they do?
They were very nice people. They came out. This was back in, 88, I think, or was it 89? The beginning of 89. It was in February of 89, I think it was.
Right.
They were very nice people. I contacted them. They said they were coming out to California to have some kind of convention or something with a friend of theirs. I think his name was Chuck Moses from Los Angeles.
Okay.
And so they said they would stop and try and see if they could help us. Ed Warren was... I mean, you could sit and talk to him for hours. He was such a very kind, nice man. Lorraine was a little different. She's a little standoffish, a little reserved, but they were both very nice. I remember they came into the house. Now, whenever the entity did something, very few times did you actually ever get to see it. It's like you had to turn your back or blink an eye before it happened. And this is one of the things I actually saw. When Lorraine came into the room, she walked by a toy box, and the toy box slid right out in front of her. So I actually saw that. And that was one of the rare times it did something in front of someone.
Okay. So the Warrens tried, but no luck.
They came. We all sat down. She said, I'm going to walk through the house. She walked through the house. She came back down. She was rather pale. And I remember she looked at us and said, this demon is the most powerful, ancient, evil demon I have ever experienced. She said, this is bad. I remember turning dead and saying, this is bad, Ed. This is really bad. Of course, my mother-in-law almost passed out when she heard this because it really scared her. They told us they didn't have any contacts in California, someone who could come and help us other than them.
Right.
And so they decided, Ed said he would do a rite of provocation.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
I really don't know either. It's just he kind of confronted the demon. But,
Okay.
At the time, I think there was more than one thing in the house. Because you got the feeling there was one strong thing and maybe some other things that weren't quite as powerful. But there was like one main thing that was the bad one. And I remember they went in and we all sat in a circle. And at the time we had a researcher staying with us whose name was Gary, who was brought to us by a friend who became a good friend of ours, Brian Hurst. Mm-hmm. He tried to help us. He was a medium in Los Angeles, a quite famous medium. He tried to help us. He wouldn't go into trance in the house because he said it was just too dangerous, but he did try to get people to come and help us. And he brought Gary. Gary was a researcher. He was staying with us, and the entity just hated Gary. He would torment Gary as much as he tormented my mother-in-law. So we sat in a circle, and Ed and Lorraine brought a gentleman, I think his name was Kevin, who videotaped everything. He videotaped it. And I remember we were sitting in the living room, and Ed did prayers, and he did some other kinds of things, and then he called forth the demon. Now, my father-in-law was sitting right next to me, and I remember my father-in-law started to change. Excuse me. I don't mean literally change into a monster, but there was subtle changes. His arm curled up to his chest. His back started to bend forward, so he kind of leaned forward. Wow. And he kind of became something different than what he was. And he stood up, and he walked towards Ed, and he dragged his one leg, and he went towards Ed. And when Ed saw him coming towards him, he got frightened, and he held up a little piece of wood he had, and he said, "This is a holy relic from the cross. You can't harm me." And my father-in-law, in a voice that was completely different than his, but his voice, said, "I'm going to bite your hand off and take your hand in that wood and chew it up and spit it in your face." And then all of a sudden, my father-in-law turned around, walked back in the couch, sat down on the couch, and went back to normal.
This is a horror movie.